Well, I'm impressed. This is awesome. Thank you for packing in the room. And it seems like that takeaway in the keynote actually made some effect here, because there's people waiting outside to get into this session. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here early. So we're going to talk about Microsoft Graph. And you heard Satya mention it in the keynote. You heard Scott mention it in the keynote. You heard Harry. It's basically one of the big things, one of the 10 big things that we have at Build for all of you developers. I'm super excited about talking about the possibilities of Microsoft Graph, the things, what it is, what's new for Build, and show you how you can get started developing applications with it. So why is it important? It's because it is the data behind Microsoft Graph that is driving productivity. It is a data that helps people get the work done. It is about the organizational data, users, and the organizational structure, the people that they work with, their files, their content, their meetings, their notes, their tasks, all of this information that drives productivity and that you can use in your applications to build, sky's the limit. And we'll talk about that. With Microsoft Graph, you can actually connect with all of the 100 million users that are active in Office 365, and also the hundreds of millions of users that are active in Outlook.com and OneDrive. My name is Ina Arenas. I'm a program manager on the Office platform, and I have been working on the Microsoft Graph team since its early inception back on the Office 365 APIs, and how we're always striving to make the developer experience easier to accessing all of the services that are part of the Microsoft Cloud platform. So today, we're going to talk about 4 things. First, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the opportunity I mentioned already, all of these users, all of that data. Then we're going to talk about how it can help you build all of your applications, how you can start using the Microsoft Graph. And throughout the entire session, I'm going to be talking about what's new. So I'm not going to leave it at the end, but I'm just going to do a nice recap at the end of all of the different things that we're announcing as part of the Build conference. And obviously, I'm going to do lots of demos. We're also going to have a partner showcase as part of the session. So with that, let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the opportunity. You saw, for those of you that were part of the Office 365 session earlier this morning, you saw about this Build app as well. Microsoft Graph starts with bringing you the information about the user, who the user is. So it's the person, who they report to, the context that they have, the people that they work with, who they collaborate, the groups that they're a member of, and so forth. So this is the people graph that Satya was mentioning in the keynote this morning. Then it goes to content. So it goes to the files and the devices and the documents and events and tasks and meetings and all of the different set of content and activities, back to the reference to the keynote, activities that are happening within our cloud services. Those include conversations as well. That can be chats in Teams, or it can be email messages in Outlook. And finally, there's insights. Insights about what the people are doing within our services, when they're meeting, the documents that are trending because people are looking at them and they're collaborating on top of them, or the people that they're working with, even if they don't report to the same organizational structure. So that's the Microsoft Graph. All of this information together, available to you under a single API endpoint. It is a REST-based endpoint that follows just normal REST conventions. So any device capable of making an HTTP request can basically make a call to the Microsoft Graph. Obviously, there is some security considerations, but it's just an HTTP request. And the Microsoft Graph is the foundation for the Office 365 platform. All of the data in Office 365 exposed through the Microsoft Graph. And as a developer, the opportunity for you to build integrations on top of the Office 365 platform using this data. And they can be applications that are part of the Office experience, or they can be standalone web and device applications. If they're part of the Office canvases, then we have documents, conversations, and pages, like getting an application that interacts with data from Office 365 into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or maybe onto Outlook or Teams, or into SharePoint. And then they can be in standalone device applications as well, or mobile applications. So we call these extensions on the Office 365 site. And for your devices applications, you can also embed canvases. Like, for example, you have a web application and you embed, for example, an Excel file or a Word file, and having the ability to view through that and also being able to access the data that is in the service. And if we look a little bit about numbers, so if we just talk about Office 365 alone, 90% of Fortune 500 companies are customers of Office 365, and hence they have all data in the Microsoft Graph. There are over 100 million active users that are using an Office 365 on a daily basis, that have their data, their calendar, their mail, their files, their contacts, all of that information as part of the service. We have around 50,000 organizations that are joining Office 365 on a monthly basis, and that makes for a enormous amount of data that is available in the Microsoft Cloud and available through the Microsoft Graph. So that's the opportunity. Lots of data, lots of users. Now, how can it help you? Let's start looking at what Microsoft Graph has to offer to you. There's two things. There's data available through the REST API endpoint, and there's a set of capabilities that the API supports so that you can make your application more performant or it's easier to build. Let's start with the data. First of all, as I was mentioning before, Microsoft Graph is a REST API available under one endpoint. The endpoint is graph.microsoft.com. We have two versions available at this point in time. Version V1, which is the version that has all of the available APIs ready for production use. And we have a version Beta, which is a preview version where we have a lot of APIs that are not yet on the V1 version, and then we are experimenting with them. We might change them before they graduate into V1. In order to access that data, obviously, it's a REST endpoint, but it's not that you can just go call it and get all of the data from the users in Office 365. You have to be authorized. So you present a token. This is a basic Auth 2.0 token that you get from Azure Active Directory that contains the scopes and the permissions that your app has in order to call the REST endpoint. And with that, you can get access to all of the data across all of the users, not only in Office 365, but I was mentioning as well that the consumer cloud, so users in Outlook.com, OneDrive, and that are part of the consumer or personal accounts are also available through the Microsoft Graph. So today at Build, we're announcing a few things. First, we're welcoming the Microsoft Teams to the API, to the Microsoft Graph. This is a preview API that allows you to create channels and conversations within Teams. We're also announcing in preview Project Roam API. There's a few sessions that are going to dive deeper into the details of this. In particular, Project Roam has a session tomorrow that I recommend you to join. This is bringing devices and activities into the Microsoft Graph. Also thing that Satya mentioned this morning in the keynote. And that tomorrow's keynote is going to be packed on information about that. We're bringing SharePoint Sites API to GA. So for all of you that interact with SharePoint, Microsoft Graph makes it exponentially easier to interact with SharePoint because you don't have to figure out what the URL of the SharePoint site is. You just go to the Graph endpoint, and you can interact with all of the sites in SharePoint. We have the OneNote API also coming into GA. Basically, the ability to interact with all of the OneNote notebooks that are part of either Office 365 or OneDrive Consumer, you can do with the OneNote API. And finally, the Planner API. So Planner is a service that allows you to create plans and tasks and buckets and make your project optimize the way that you'd run projects. And you can also interact with a Planner through their API available in the Microsoft Graph that is now also generally available. And just a quick note, when I say GA or generally available, it means that it's in the v1.0 endpoint and that you can use in your production applications. It basically means that we're not going to break them. You can rely on them. The ones that are in preview, there might be some changes coming into them as we mature them based on feedback and then move them to v1. Okay, that's in terms of data. Now let's take a look a little bit deeper in terms of, I'm going to show some queries of what it gets you in terms of the data. So we have the user profile. And the most simplest query is just calling to the user's endpoint in the Microsoft Graph and going either with an ID or with a principal name to the user's endpoint and figuring out who the user is. So the response back is going to bring back information about that user. Then you can call the photos endpoint and get back the picture. The most simplest thing, just imagine you have a web application and that you integrate with Office 365 and start bringing a whole bunch of personalization into your web app. Because you know who the user is, you know their picture, you know a whole bunch of information about them that can help you personalize the experience of the users in your application. But it goes beyond from that. I can also access all of the organizational structure. So you can see the manager, you can see the reports, you can see who are the groups that I'm a member of. All of that with very simple REST requests that are just basically path navigations on the API. So one is access to profile. Now then it's access to content. When we look at content, there's actually a lot of things that are a part of available in the graph. Documents, calendars, sites, tasks, email, contacts, meetings. And here's a few examples of just those requests. If I want to get access to files in my OneDrive, just calling the me/drive/root endpoint gives me all of the set of file/children, give me all of the set of files that are part of my OneDrive. I can then navigate to, like for example, if I have an Excel file, navigate to that Excel file and then the /workbook and get access to a huge set of APIs available on Excel that allow me to interact with contents on that particular file. I can interact with the sheets, with the tables, with charts, and all of that information in Excel. Super, super powerful. Events, calendars, notebooks, planners, devices, a whole bunch of information available. And we're going to show this in a demo in a second. Then comes insights. And if you think about the user and the data, it's good. But when you have the opportunity to access information about what the users are doing in the service, that brings it to a whole different level. Being able to just know who the people who are the person that people are working with. And as I was mentioning in the demo this morning in the keynote, not only who are you working with, but working with on a specific topic. So I can make a request on the people endpoint to go and search, for example, on the topic planning. And it's going to, or tact, or some other keyword, and it's going to bring me back the people that I work with to which I've had conversations on that particular keyword. That is super powerful. That is not just giving you static data, but it's giving you data that is contextual to the user and the activities that the user does within the service. We also have other APIs, like, for example, the trending API, that returns a set of documents that are popular for a user in a given point in time, either because people in their group have been collaborating on those documents, or because we think they're relevant for the user based on the activities on them. You see the experience that Outlook has when you want to attach a new file, and it brings you the recent files, right? We have the APIs as well for powering those experiences. So when you go to the Drive Recent endpoint, it's going to bring you all of the recent files that the user has accessed within the a given past time window. And then we also have APIs that allow you to take away the heavy lifting of doing calculations. How many times you want to schedule a meeting with someone and you're like, can you do Friday 3 p.m.? No, I can't. Can you do Monday at 2? No, I can't. Well, we have an API that actually takes care of figuring out all of the attendees' calendars, doing the correlation of transposition of those calendars, and figuring out the best time for meeting within a given group. Just a simple API call, and you get all of that information available to you. So that's in terms of data. So I mentioned there's two things. There's data and there's capabilities. Now let's take a look at the capabilities that the graph has that can help you build powerful applications. First is traversal of relationships. So when we think about files that are sitting in OneDrive, and who are the users that modified those files, and being able to traverse to that particular user and then say, like, who are their managers or what are the groups that they belong to. All of those connections between the data that we have in Office 365, you can traverse through the graph. For example, in Planner, when I have a task that has been assigned to me, I can navigate to that person's full profile in Azure Active Directory and navigate to all the relationships that that person might have. For example, the recent files, right? Being able to traverse the graph is one of the capabilities that the graph offers. Second is about query parameters. The graph follows OData, which basically allows a set of query parameters on top of the queries. For example, doing top or doing select or doing expand on the request that allow you to shape the form of the responses that you get back. Today at Build, we're announcing also batching capabilities. So this is the ability of sending a whole bunch of different requests on one single call all the way to the server processes them and gives them back to you. You can even go and tie them together. Say, for example, request 2 depends on the results of request 1, and we'll see that in a demo. And then we have notifications and track changes, which basically give you the opportunity to just, instead of having to poll for the data, like, for example, I want to receive a notification the next time that a user is added. I basically create a webhook, and I get back that notification, and then I can kick off a workflow out of that particular notification. And then with the power of Delta, basically it allows us to not having to sync the data, but make a call and just get the things that change between the last time that you called and this time. And finally, extensions. Extensions basically allows you to bring your data into the Microsoft Graph. So for example, if you have a mobile application that also has a web component and you want to theme the experience, you could save the favorite color of the user using an extension and not having to rely on having your own store for simple data like that. Okay, let's look at that in more detail. First, we're going to start with batch. Here I have an example of a batch request. And I was mentioning there's 4 requests at this point in time. What we're doing here is JSON batching that allows you to combine multiple requests in a single HTTP call. This is pure JSON, so it's very simple. You will see that there is a requests parameter in there, and then you can put in the different set of requests that you want to send in. Each request will have an ID, a URL, and a method. If it is a post request, you also include the body and the headers. Very simple JSON to batch in requests into the Microsoft Graph. Then we also have, as I mentioned, notification and track changes. Here you can make a call to the Delta function. Say, for example, like the example that I have here, I'm making a call to the Delta functions on the messages endpoint, in particular in a particular folder. And then I subscribe to that particular folder. The next time that the user gets an email on that folder, I'm going to get a notification, and I can come back with the Delta token that I got from the Delta request and only get back the data that's changed. So super simple in a way to track changes on the data that is having in the Microsoft Graph. And finally, extensions. So in extensions, we have 2 different types of extensions. We have open-type extensions, and we have schema extensions. Open-type extensions allow you to create very basic key-value pairs into the user information. For example, here I'm using an open-type extension on an email to say that this email is just a customer referral. Schema extensions are I will say more powerful in a way that they allow you to define a schema that you can apply to all of the entities on that particular, on a given resource. For example, if I define a schema that defines a class, the example that I have here is a training course saying these groups are going to have Math 101, and all of them are going to have this curriculum. And I define the schema for the class Math 101. And if my Office 365 customer is a school or something like that, multiple groups can model as those classes, and will have that particular schema applied to those groups, right? So it's an easy way to get access to that information. And then when I query, I can just filter, for example, on the extension that I created. So I have a query here to groups where I filter on all the classes which course name equals Math 101. So it is your data on top of the data in Office 365 and giving you the ability to go and connect that with the data that is coming from your web application. And now I'm going to jump over to Jeremy. Jeremy was actually part of our team not so long ago, and he decided to jump ship to go create a startup that is using the Microsoft Graph very heavily, and he's going to share a little bit of his experience there. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Ina. And good keynote this morning as well. It was nice to see you on stage. So at Hyperfish, we're all about bringing people together, and the way we do this is by making profiles complete within every organization. Now, we use the graph heavily to do this. So on this screen here with a dashboard, we're actually analyzing Active Directory using the Microsoft Graph. We run a full analysis every day, which goes and checks based on company standards, fields that are missing, like the manager field or the profile photo field. And then on incremental basis during the day, we actually use that delta query to only go and get what changes have happened in that directory. So it's really efficient for us when we've got lots and lots of organizations we're running these scans through. And so for instance, what this allows us to do is start to see that in this particular tenant that we only have 4% of our users that actually have profile pictures involved. Now, the way that we interact with our users is we send emails that are personalized that highlight what those missing profile properties are within their particular profiles in Office 365. And you can actually respond to this directly in email. So for instance, I could put in here, my street address is 1 Microsoft Way, and click send. And we're using the Microsoft Bot framework to basically pass that email message and then go and add that into our service. And if there's no approval in there, it'll automatically go and update that directly into Azure Active Directory, into SharePoint user profiles, and so forth. But we can also go through, if people aren't comfortable with using bots just yet, although the hype was very strong in the keynote this morning, in the profile pages here, you can actually go and do that same thing. So for instance, I can go in and edit this page, and all this information is loaded using the Microsoft Graph. And the nice part about this is it's very not chatty, because we can make one call and get all the attributes we need in one hit back to the service and render that in the page. So it's really efficient for developers to use. And we do nice things, for instance, where we can have drop-downs for things like department names, which enforces consistency in those profiles. Now, in addition to that, a demo at Build this year wouldn't be a demo without showing some artificial intelligence. So if I wanted to go and update my profile photo, a common thing that you'll see in your organization is pictures of cats and pictures of dogs and all sorts of things like that. We actually use the Cognitive Services Vision APIs to validate that although I'd like to brag that I was in the back of this photo with Satya and Bill, that in actual fact, this profile photo isn't suitable for the organization, and it'll actually come back and flag that there are too many faces in this photo. So we do a lot of work to make sure that as a company, you have a consistent standard across all of your profiles and so forth. Now, the really kind of important part about all this is that from an administration console perspective, when those changes come through in the approvals, what we'll actually see is that you're not the user anymore because I'm the approver. And so we use a dedicated approval process with Azure Active Directory to automatically go and make those updates into Active Directory. So it's really useful because it meant we didn't have to store usernames and passwords within my service to actually then go and update each individual Active Directory profile. And the other benefit there is for the organizations is they can see when our service Hyperfish is actually connecting into their Azure Active Directory. And if they choose, they could go and kind of remove that Azure Active Directory application directly from their control panel inside the Azure portal. So it gives the customer a lot of kind of exposure into what permissions we're using when we access the graph, and it makes our life a lot easier as a developer. Our developers weren't Microsoft developers when we hired them. They were actually Node developers. They didn't have very much experience with Active Directory, Exchange, and SharePoint. So when they went and looked at the graph and they realized it was a REST endpoint, it was super easy for them once they kind of got used to the authentication of Azure Active Directory to then be able to call all those different REST services and basically not really know that that's going to Active Directory and that's going to Exchange and that's going to SharePoint. So our speed to get this product to market during Ignite in September was super fast because how easy it was to get going with the graph. So if you're looking to anything on this, I'd highly recommend jumping to graph.microsoft.io and checking out the Graph Explorer, because that's where our developers started to really get to know and learn how to use the Microsoft Graph.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Cool. You're welcome.
OK. So I think that basically gives us into what is it that you can build with the graph. There's a whole bunch of opportunity here to build either intelligent business processes with the capabilities that I showed about. Smart Meetings, as a demo that you showed this morning in the keynote, was heavily using the Microsoft Graph behind it. The graph-connected devices, like how do you think Cortana was getting all of those meetings? Through the Microsoft Graph. Smart Pickers, like for example, getting to the users, to the people that you're working with or the recent files. Graph-powered bots, for those of you who were this earlier on the session on the Office overview, Rob demoed a startup project for getting Lewis and the bot framework connected into the Microsoft Graph. So I highly recommend that you go back and check on that. And also the tag demo that I did this morning. It was bot framework talking to the Microsoft Graph. And then custom dashboards integrating SharePoint and all of the different page capabilities calling into the Microsoft Graph. And you'll hear more on the SharePoint session. There's a lot of things that you can build. Simple access to data, all of the capabilities available for you. So just to recap this session, easy access to all of the data in Office 365. It's built on a web standards and it's an open platform. It's secure at the core. All of the data that is available in the Microsoft Graph goes through this authentication and authorization flow in order for the user to consent to either you get access to that data and the auth flow to give you an access token to go then and call the graph. And finally, is more than 100 million users, 100 million if you just look at Office 365 and the commercial side of the house, but many, many more for the consumer piece. OK, I think that completes the 200-level session portion of the session. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper on using the Microsoft Graph. And actually, you can help me here with a demo. So we're going to be doing a demo that is going to be looking at the Twitter API and scanning for all of the tags, the places where you tag the Microsoft Graph with one of these languages. Then we're going to be adding all of that data into Excel. We're going to be using an Azure function that goes and grabs that data from Excel, creates a chart, and sends it over a report into my email. So we want to see some data in there. So get some tweets going. OK. Let me just make sure that this is running. Just a second over here. OK. So now what I'm going to do is, while you guys tweet, I'm going to mention how is it that we get started with the Microsoft Graph. Let me just switch over to 7. So as Jeremy mentioned, if you just go to your browser and go to graph.microsoft.com, you will be redirected to our Graph portal. Here you will be able to find all of the documentation and all of the getting started experiences linked to code samples, SDKs, and all of the information that you need in order to get started with the Microsoft Graph. I'm going to show very quickly how easy you can get started with the Microsoft Graph and build your own project in less than 2 minutes. We're going to start here in the Quick Start. And in the Quick Start, you're going to be able to select the platform that you're building. I'm going to select ASP.NET Web Application. And right there, within this experience, I will be able to create an app ID, a secret, and get all of the information that I need in order to get my app up and running. This is going to redirect to apps.dev.microsoft.com, which is the portal that you register your applications to interact with any service in the Microsoft Cloud. And it should have done the redirection with the creation of the app. Let's try that again. Let's try the quick start one more time. So I'm going to come here to the quick start. I'm going to click ASP.NET application, get app ID and secret. And there it goes. It's going to create an app ID and a secret for me right away. And it's going to ask me to go and copy paste this secret. I'm using here delegated flow. Takes me back to the quick start. Automatically adds all of the information about my application, the app ID, the redirect URI, and I can paste in the secret. And then I can just basically download an SDK a sample that is based on the SDK that I can use to call into the Microsoft Graph. So let's just save it in the desktop. We can come here and extract this and run it in Visual Studio right away. So I get my project. When it launches and opens Visual Studio, it has all of the references that it needs. It has all of the libraries, everything. All I need to do is basically just run it. It's going to build a solution. And OK. And now I can come here and, no, I don't want to give you back right now, Visual Studio. I can come here and just run this application, literally, minor a couple of glitches there. In less than 2 minutes, I can have a web application running that is connected to the Microsoft Graph and is giving me information about the users. OK. There it goes. It's going to launch Edge. And it's going to show me that web application. This is how simple it is to just get up and running in the platform of your choice. I selected ASP.NET, but there's a whole bunch of different options in the Graph Explorer, in the Quick Start that you can use. The same process. Whether you're building a mobile app or a web application, you can come here, get started, and then it bootstraps all of your development. In this particular demo, it signs me in. So it's already taking care of all of the authorization and authentication pieces. It's already asking for that token and that consent to get access to the data. I go and accept to it, and it has access to the information of the user. Super simple to get started with the Microsoft Graph. Now, let's take a look at the Graph Explorer. Actually, let me go back to here just to show a couple of things on calling the Microsoft Graph. Right here, and then 8. So that's the quick start. Now, when you're calling the API, it's very simple. As I mentioned, it's a REST endpoint, so the verbs indicate the intent: get, post, put, delete, patch. I mentioned the 2 versions and when to use which. Then you address a resource, either it's a users, groups, sites, drives, and so forth. From there, you can navigate to a member of that particular collection with an ID. And I showed the example of navigating to the user information early on. And then you can navigate to properties. So for example, here I have department, or I can do a related navigation to messages or events or files and something like that. And then I mentioned query OData and the query parameters that allow me to shape the request that I get back. Now, here are some common queries, but let's take a look at them in action using the Graph Explorer. So I'm in the Graph Explorer. And for those of you that have already interacted with Microsoft Graph and have played with the Graph Explorer before, just this week we released a huge update to the Graph Explorer. And a couple of things that I'm going to mention. One, you don't need an account in Office 365 or in the Microsoft Personal Cloud in order to interact with the Graph Explorer. It comes preloaded with a demo account. So here I have not signed in, and I can start running queries. And what it will do is, like, it's already integrating with a demo account in Office 365. And it's going to show me a set of sample queries that I can use to get started. So for example, getting the profile, or getting the photo, or getting the messages for that particular person. Is that the right? Let me see if we can make it a little bit bigger. Or getting all of the items in OneDrive. I can start playing with all of the data without having to get my own account or without having to use my own information. Well, but doing that it obviously only works for GET requests. So when you want to do something more interesting, you have to sign in. And then you can sign in with either your Outlook.com account or your Office 365 commercial account, right? Like, for example, here I chose to sign in with my Outlook.com account, and it's going to give me all of that information about the profile for that particular account. So it works for both consumer and commercial services. Now I'm going to sign out from this one. I'm going to sign in with the commercial account, and I'm going to show a couple of queries of the data that we were discussing before. So first, I'm going to query here as soon as it signs in. First thing I'm going to show, like I mentioned the getting started queries. There's a whole bunch more of queries that you can come here and start playing with the data that is available in the Microsoft Graph. Right now I had getting started on, but I can remove that one and turn in the users queries. And it's going to bring me back sample queries of all of the different things that I have in this particular tenant, and links directly to the documentation where that particular API is discussed. Super simple way to interact with all of the data. Now let's look at some of the new query capability, new APIs that have been announced this week as part of Build. So I'm going to come here and look at some of the planner requests. And we haven't updated the Graph Explorer, still says beta, but it's GA now. So I'm going to say, for example, all of the different, this is an interesting one. Planner actually requires a group. So it says, in order to interact with this API, you will need to go find a group where they have planners. So go and make a request to group get member of. You see, the Graph Explorer is guiding me to all of the different things that I can do with the graph, and it's also telling me how to go and be successful. So I'm going to make a request to member of. I'm just going to put it here. And it's going to say you don't have sufficient permissions in order to perform this request. You can go and grant these permissions right here within the Graph Explorer. So I can go and say, OK, I want to modify my permissions. Actually, in order to get access to groups, I need to go and select the group permissions, which I actually had. Let's see if that, it's not making any change. So let's go and say, OK, let's figure out, again, to see if it had any issues. Interesting. OK, so let's try another request. Let's try another request on groups to see what's going on there. OK. So actually, I can access all of the group information, and all of the different groups are right here. I think there is a group that is called Northwind. Let me see if I can type in here. This project, this particular group has some tasks. Let's go and check this out. Go back to getting all of the plans associated to a particular group. Paste in here the ID. And then I can come back and get access to all of the different tasks and plans that are part of that particular group in Planner. So it's very simple to access all of that information. We see the examples in Planner. Now let's take a look at some of the examples in SharePoint. So I have the SharePoint APIs right here. I can just go turn on and off the capabilities, come back and say, for example, get access to all of the SharePoint, and this is actually can work in a v1.0 endpoint, and get access to all of the SharePoint sites that are the root SharePoint site of this organization. Very simple request. Now, I also mentioned OneNote is part of the APIs that are going GA. So let's go and look for the OneNote examples. And I can get access to all of my notebooks with just a simple request, and get access to all of the information that is coming with OneNote. Now, not only GET requests are supported, I can go and create a whole bunch of different information. I'm just showing this is the GET request because it's simpler. But for example, let's create one of the OneNote notebooks, and you'll notice that right here within the post request, this one is actually very simple. The Graph Explorer is going to show you right away what's the payload of the body for the post request. So you can just go and execute that query and see a failure come in. Let's try another one. Let's try one where we create actually a group, since that one was. Let's try this post request. Say the group that I had before, I can add it to one of my favorites. So it's going to come back, and it's going to say, OK, it's a success request, one of the post requests. OK, so you can get access to, using the Graph Explorer, you can come here and get access to all of these sets of information and all of this data as part of the Microsoft Graph, and just turn in and on all of the different queries and start playing with all of the data and the information. Super easy and super fast. Now let's look at some of the capabilities that I was mentioning. Remember that I mentioned open extensions. So right here we have sample queries for extensions. The example here, first we're going to get one of these extensions. And let me see if I can just make this a little bit bigger, or just zoom in here. You'll see that the user comes in. The request that I'm making is a request to get the user information, and I'm also calling in for getting the extensions. This particular user already has an extension that has a theme, a color, and a language associated to it. It's stamped on the user, and I can go then and create more extensions, modify this extension, and access all of this data as part of a simple request as I am getting the data from the user. So you'll notice I selected the ID, the name, the phones, and then expanded on extensions. Now let's go and patch this particular extension. That extension had the favorite color being yellow and the language Swahili. It's actually not my favorite color. Mine is purple. And my language is Spanish, as you learned this morning. And when we run this query, it's going to update. Oh, I need to put in the extension ID. So let's paste this, copy this. Let's go back to get the extension. The extension has an ID, which is this one, comcontoso.roaming settings. You can come back here, paste in the extension ID over here. There you go. And then let's just, for the sake of time, update this just the language. We run this query, and it's going to come back with a status 204. We can come back to get on those extensions, and we'll see that the data was just updated. Super simple to get access to, basically putting in your own data into the Microsoft Graph. Now let's take a look at a schema extension. So we mentioned that there's two types of extensions. One is OpenType, the one that we just saw, which is basic key-value pairs. Now there's also the opportunity to do schema extensions where you define your own schema. We're going to get, I had already one defined here, this one. And it's going to get all of the available schema extensions that we have defined for this particular tenant. We're going to take a look at this one right here that says, circuit ID for global schema. And it has a whole bunch of different properties that I have defined that I can go and stamp on a given user. On a given group. I'm sorry, the type is group. So when I go and get these groups based on that schema, you're going to see that I can get, well, this one is another schema. You're going to see that I can get all of the groups that had that particular schema stamp on that entity. So it's very simple for me to go and define a schema, update the information, and then filter the groups based on that data. Now, finally, I'm going to show batching as one of the capabilities of the API. Remember I shared that you can go and do batch requests, which basically is going to be a post to the $batch endpoint that you're going to be able to go and create multiple requests that are chained into each other. So here I have 3 requests refined, one for getting the profile, the second one for getting messages, and the third one for getting events. I can go and put them all in there and come back and make that request. The server is going to give me a response that is going to include all of the different set of responses concatenated with the status codes of each of the responses. Very simple to go and do batch requests on top of the Microsoft Graph. OK, now let's go and look at Visual Studio. Well, actually, this one's still running. Let's stop that. Let's go back to the slides and take a look at a couple of things that are new in terms of experiences for enabling you to build integrations into the Microsoft Graph. First, we have a set of SDK samples and tooling available to you. We have samples on all of these different platforms that you see on the screen. And we have SDKs available for them as well. So we have a .NET SDK that you can use in ASP.NET applications, Xamarin, UWP, that has been updated for the latest bits for GA. We have an Android SDK as well, and we have a newly coming into GA SDKs for JavaScript and for PHP. The JavaScript SDK is also pretty cool because it comes with typing definitions, and it gives you full intelligence in Visual Studio Code. We also have a set of preview SDKs on iOS, Python, and Ruby. And the Visual Studio team has updated the connected services experience to allow you to create right from Visual Studio applications that integrate with the Microsoft Graph. And actually, let's take a look at that Visual Studio integration. So here I am in Visual Studio. And what I did with this particular project is I went into the Graph portal, and I cloned one of the sample projects. This one is the ASP.NET sample. I cloned it directly from GitHub. And when I clone it, it's not, if I look at the web.config file, it's not going to have any app registration. So earlier in the quick start, I showed you how you could go through the quick start to register an app, get an app running, and then run it. Here, what I did is I went to GitHub, cloned the repo, and just open up in Visual Studio. So I could separately go and do the registration for the application on either the Windows Azure portal or on apps.dev.microsoft.com. But I can also use here the connected services experiences that Visual Studio has. Come on, launch connected services experience. There you go. So we also have the connected services experiences that allows you from right here within the Visual Studio, go and create an application. So I'm going to say I want to access Office 365 with the Microsoft Graph. And it's going to give me this configuration wizard that is going to allow me to select my domain. And this, let me just click over here. It's going to ask me if I want to create a new application. And then it's going to allow me to select the set of permissions that I want my application to have. So for this particular application, I'm going to say that I want to sign in and read the information and read basic profiles. And I want to send mail. And I want to have files. And then I click Next. And basically what Visual Studio is going to do is going to go and contact Azure Active Directory, create that application, put all of the permissions in there, go and modify my project, add all of the references down. If I had not already put in the NuGet packages for the SDK, either for the auth libraries or for the graph libraries, it's going to add them into my project. So if I come here into my references, all of the references are going to be there, and it's going to give me that registration of the application. So my client ID, my secret, everything is right here. And I can come into the example and just run it. I actually had this sample right here. When you clone it and download it, what it does is it looks for your information, looks for the photo that you have in Office 365, downloads it, puts it in a OneDrive, and then sends you an email. So I on purpose took the part that is the line that is calling the Microsoft Graph to get the profile photo, just to show you a little bit of the .NET SDK. So here we have created a graph client. I'm going to instantiate the client, and then I'm going to go to the me endpoint, and then go to the photo. You see that we have full intelligence, and I'm going to get the content on that photo, and then I'm going to make that request using the request builder, and I'm going to get that async. So that's how easy it is to use the .NET SDK. Once we have that completed, then I can just run this project, and it's going to go and grab that photo from my profile, download it, put it into OneDrive, and send an email with that. Also a very simple way to start from either Visual Studio, when you clone one of our samples, to get started with the Microsoft Graph. OK, let's let that run for a second and jump to our next demo. Let's see, over here. Actually, before jumping to the next demo, I'm going to make a quick mention to, so I've gone super fast around all of the auth pieces. But as I mentioned, access to the Microsoft Graph data is secured by Azure Active Directory. And all you need is getting a token in order to get access to the data. There's multiple flows supported for native applications, for mobile applications. And there's libraries for you to use, both on the server side and on the client side. If you want to learn more, make sure that you visit Vittorio's session tomorrow. That's the information there is B8084, where he's going to go in depth around all of the different auth flows and the things that are new. What I'm really excited about this time around is that for those of you who have been developing with Azure Active Directory for a while, we now have libraries, supported production libraries that you can use for both our consumer and commercial. So these are the Microsoft authentication libraries. We have them in a full suite of platforms. We have also third-party open source libraries that you can use, because this is Auth 2.0. So it's basic protocol that you can just use other open source libraries as well, that will allow you to develop applications that work against consumer and commercial services with the same code base. So it's pretty awesome. So go to that session. I'm also going to make a comment around permissions. So basically, you'll learn on Vittorio's session how to get the tokens. But in order to get access to the data, you saw that when I launched the applications, they showed a consent screen, right? And they have all of these permissions that you can use in order to get access to data in the Microsoft Graph. There's actually two types of applications, or two types of access that you will have. One is get access on behalf of the users. So this is getting access. I give you application full access to get my email or get my files. And the second one, this one works for mobile, web, and single-page applications. And the ones that can consent are either the users, because they're consenting to their own data, or administrators when they're consenting to the data across the entire company. The permissions of the requests are actually going to be the intersection of both the app permissions and the user permissions. So what does it mean? So say, for example, an administrator grants an application to access to go and scan all of to go and, send email on your behalf, right? I will not, when I come and use the application, I will not be able to send email on behalf of Jeremy. I will only be able to send email on my behalf when I'm using that application, even though the application does have access to send email for all users. Similar for files. Like if we had an application that you can access files across OneDrive, I will only be able to access the files that I have access to. The second one is an application that is acting as a service or as a daemon. And this one basically, only administrators can consent. This is an application, for example, that an administrator grants access to go and scan all of the mailboxes for social security numbers, right? So it can perform those activities across all of the organizational data without having a user that is interacting in the request. And the effective permissions of that is actually the permissions that are granted to the app. It's like app roles that are granted to the app. OK. So now we're going to do the recap of the things that are new at Build. And actually, we showed this slide on the general session. In terms of data, They have a lot of different things that are coming into the graph. We have Planner, OneNote, and SharePoint sites that reached GA. In terms of preview, we have Teams. We have a set of new Insight APIs that are used and shared that are coming in by the end of this month. And we have the trending API that was updated a couple of weeks ago. SharePoint lists. Outlook tasks is actually one of our top requests on Stack Overflow. It's finally on the graph. Intune, it's also part of the graph, so all of the device information from Intune is part of the Microsoft Graph. Reporting data from Office 365, including Skype, administrative units, and as I mentioned earlier, device and activity information coming from Project Rome. In terms of capabilities, so there's a set of SDKs that have been updated and new that have been available. The JavaScript SDK that you can use with Node and PHP. There's new support for webhooks capability, using them on Outlook. There's Delta Query. There's the ability to extend the graph with your own data. In preview, we have now webhook support for users and groups. So you can subscribe for when a new group is added to a new user is added to the organization, when a new user is added to a group. We have also, as I showed, support for Delta and batching. And now it's worth to note that Microsoft Graph is available in every single place where we have Office 365, and that it complies with sovereign and national requirements. So for example, if you're building an app, that same app can work for a customer that is in Germany, which we have a sovereign cloud deployment for them, or in China. We have an improved developer experience with the things that I showed you. And I'm going to go to giving you a picture opportunity right here to go and figure out the next session where Ryan Gregg is going to talk about OneDrive, SharePoint, and the Microsoft Graph and all the things that are new. And we also have a whole bunch of videos that are available with all of the deep dives on updates on the Microsoft Graph. So go watch them on Channel 9. And now we're going to go to the demo that I showed earlier. So I hope that you had tweeted, and we're going to look into that demo right here. Let me see. OK, so I have what I have here is a Node app that is calling the Microsoft Graph. And it's basically, I mentioned, is reading the Twitter API. And it's adding, as soon as it finds a match with the tag Microsoft Graph, it's going to go and add that data into Excel. It's doing it real time. And the way that it does it, it's called the drive endpoint. And it files that particular file. And then it goes and adds a row to the table. This is all of the requests that I'm making actually to the Microsoft Graph at this point in time to add all of that data live from Twitter. So let's see. OK, there's all the tweets that people have been putting during the session. They're coming in right here. And there you go. All of them we're using the Microsoft Graph to go and add all of that information right into Excel, and then creating a chart that basically gives me a nice report of how many people tweeted on which languages. Now we're going to go to another application that I have right here that is actually doing an Azure function. And this Azure function is grabbing that data from the graph. So basically it's going and calling the OneDrive to the Excel endpoint. And is then, let's go and look at that piece. It's calling OneDrive to that same endpoint, and it's going and getting that chart in an image, in a base 64 image, and then it's going to add it to an email message that it's going to send me. Now, if we take a look at this code, when I'm not using the Graph SDK, it's very easy to make mistakes. But when I use the Graph SDK, I can go and cast this as a message. Okay, hold on. And when I cast it as a message, it's going to give me intelligence right away that is going to tell me what are the things that are wrong with my code. So for example, it's telling me subject with double S is not part of the properties of a message. So I can just come here and look at the definition of message and notice that actually, I'm misspelling subject because subject has only one S. It's a very kind of dummy sample, but I fix that, and it's going to tell me there's another error. Well, the type of the item body, the content type, it's not XML. So the content type is not XML. So I can come here instead of XML and say, OK, what are the types supported? And it says it's HTML or text. So I can go and switch it to HTML. And then you'll see all of the IntelliSense because I'm writing in JavaScript, but because I'm using the SDK, it gives me all of that IntelliSense right away into my code. So now it's going to tell me, hey, email addresses is actually an array, so I can come here and fix that. Not with that one, this one. And right here, actually right here. Oops, no, it's here and here. Now I got confused on all of the. So 2 recipients can be an array, and this one is here and here, right? Now help me with my brackets. It's 1 up. There you go. No. There? Take it away. This is my brain is a little bit fried at this point in time with too many. Okay, this Cortana. How do I get these brackets right? There you go. No, it's still something wrong. One more. I need one more here. No, here. Yeah. Thank you, pair programming. Now, OK, we get this. If I run it, I'm actually going to run it right here in CLI, just because deploying these changes to Azure Functions takes some time. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to, oh, this is the live one. Let's just try the, we're going to run that function, and what it's going to do is going to go to the file. It's going to grab this particular chart that is right here, and it's then going to send me an email message that it's going to contain that particular file, that particular chart. As soon as the function runs, it's going to do that. Let's give it one more chance. It's not in there. OK, it's going to come in at some point in time. I thought even running it locally. I have the function running here. Let's try that one. Now what we're going to see is like a whole bunch of emails being sent for every time that I clicked. That gives you a basic idea of how to integrate the Microsoft Graph with Azure Functions and using the JavaScript SDK. And it's very simple to get started with, whether you're a JavaScript and Node.js programmer or you're a .NET developer, like all of the different platforms that are supported. We have samples in a whole bunch of different languages and platforms, and we'll give it this one a last chance. And it's not coming in. No, it's usually coming here. This one's still running. Let's try that one more time.
It's the braces on the email.
Yeah, that's probably it. OK, let's go and do. We'll come back for later for that one. So a little bit about roadmap. What's coming into the Microsoft Graph? I mean, you saw it in the keynote today that Microsoft is really behind this one Microsoft story. And you'll continue to see it every time that we come on stage about how more and more projects are getting consolidated behind our efforts. A whole bunch of new data sets are going to be added into the Microsoft Graph, coming in from multiple parts of the company. We know today, in particular for interacting with groups, there is a little bit of limitations in terms of having users, administrators consent to the access. So we're going to address those. richer query capabilities, and obviously getting to general availability, the features that we have in preview. Now, after you leave this room, throughout Build, there's going to be, we have a booth by the Office Platform section. There's people there that have lots of examples about the Microsoft Graph. And there's quick start challenges, so I'll invite you to go and try those and get some swag. And we're super active with the community, like tweet us with Microsoft Graph. In GitHub, we have /Microsoft Graph organization and questions in Stack Overflow. There's a set of related sessions, so you can go and take a look at that. And don't miss this one, in particular the OneDrive SharePoint session that is coming this afternoon, and the Project Rome session tomorrow. I'm going to be on the Office Q&A tomorrow as well, so if you want to bring on some of those hard questions, I'll be ready. And there's lots of Channel 9 videos. Let me actually go back, because the email came through. I'll show you. There it is. You see? And I'm going to show you one last thing, which is like during the keynote rehearsals, my buddy Richard Disarega was feeling bad because I had no time to practice my session, which you could probably see a little bit today. And he's like, I'm going to build for you a cool demo for the graph. And he built this Visual Graph Explorer. So I'm going to show it to you here. The Visual Graph Explorer actually allows me to interact with nodes in the graph. He's using D3, and he built it using Angular. And he got inspired by the things that we have in the Graph Explorer where you can turn in things on and off. And so he and Simon, who's also working on DX, added this as well. So I can come here and add all of the groups. And it's going to query the graph, and it's going to add all of the different groups that I'm part of in this particular tenant. I can add the manager, and it's going to go and query that and add all of that information. I can add files. I can add the files that I'm trending, the messages. It's going to start feeling very cluttered right here. And not only I can get access to all of that information, but I can come and, if I go to the details, I can hover to one of these over here, and it's going to give me all of the object information for that particular node. So this is a nice visual way to see all of the data that is connected in the graph for one user. After the session, we're going to go and put this on the booth so you can see the demo in more detail. And there's also a repo that if you want to continue to play with this, let me see, I think I have the link here. Yes. So Richard Disarega built this, like I mentioned, in between our keynote rehearsals. And there is the repo that right there, reachds/Visual Graph Explorer. So thank you for your time today. And I can't wait to see all of the cool stuff that you build up with the Microsoft Graph. Like I said, we're going to be here throughout the conference in the booth, and tomorrow in the Office Open Q&A session. If you see me on the hallways and have questions, happy to answer them. Say hi, and thank you for coming to the session.